The leftists cannot admit who they are. They are the party of terrorism. They are the party of political violence. While they cry and scream about the nature of our sacred democracy, what they really mean is that anyone who threatens their homogeneous rule of our country is ultimately a threat to their life, and they will kill you if you disagree or work against them.
I want to start, before we do this interview with Auron, with this tweet from Winston Marshall. Many of you have already seen it. I showed it in a previous segment. More Americans see left-wing beliefs behind Charlie Kirk's shooting than right-wing beliefs. Well, it's true. The shooter, according to the evidence, was motivated by leftist ideology. But Democrats, for some reason, 3-1, think the shooter was right-wing. Well, that's wrong. Auron MacIntyre says, "You are grieving the loss of Charlie Kirk. Your neighbor is not. In fact, they think people like you killed him. This is a difference so fundamental that no argument or evidence will change it, and you need to understand the implications of that fact." Now, I've talked about this quite a bit. The bifurcation of American culture. In a conversation I had with Stephen Marsh, he wrote a book called The Next Civil War, and he's a liberal guy. He said, within the United States, there exist two countries, a multicultural democracy and a constitutional republic. Now, he favors the multicultural democracy, the liberal guy. But he's correct. And I said, you're right. I'm a constitutional republic guy. These two nations cannot coexist in the same space. So what happens? What is true to liberals will only ever be true to liberals, and what is true to conservatives will only ever be true to conservatives. Now, me personally, I'm not even a conservative. I largely just want to know what's true. I do like the Constitution, the Founding Fathers' vision. It's created great things. And I believe that there is a truth. You cannot just subvert the will of the people by force. That defies the country that we're supposed to be defending. But the multicultural democracy left liberals, they do just that. I'm going to pull in Auron MacIntyre who can break this down for us. I believe we have him ready to go. Let's boot it up. And it's loading up, fixing the audio. Weird audio loop. And I believe we have Auron being pulled in right now. Auron, can you hear me?
Hey, how's it going?
It is going very well. How about you, sir?
Doing well, doing well.
Now, over the past couple of weeks, obviously everyone's aware of what happened. Even people who don't follow politics are talking about it when, I got to the bar or wherever it is we may be. Now, here's what's crazy. You have this tweet that I just cited. There's data showing that liberals believe the shooter of Charlie Kirk was a Republican or was a conservative. And the reason for this is largely, in my view, you've got prominent liberals intentionally lying. You have, of course, Jimmy Kimmel getting canceled after his comments was they were trying to claim he was anything but one of their own, the MAGA people. There's no way he didn't know that, in my view. He has a team of researchers and writers. They had to have seen the press conferences going over the information. John Oliver's doubled down, saying, well, it was an honest, that's what everyone thought. Stephen Colbert doubled down, said he did nothing wrong. So liberals genuinely believe this, and nothing you say will change it. And now what have we seen? At Charlie Kirk's memorial, liberals went online to say it was a Nazi rally. They went on to say that they were lying about mourning Charlie Kirk, and they were calling for action. I've received death threats. Others have. You made this statement in response to this poll saying that you right now are mourning Charlie Kirk, but they are not. And it's a difference so fundamental. You need to understand what that means. So I'm curious, what does this mean?
Well, a lot of people knew what they were doing from the very beginning. The media knows that if they go out there and set the narrative, they set the pace, they put out the idea that this shooter is right wing before any of the facts come in, that they have set an anchor that will be almost impossible to remove from the minds of their audiences. Because people at MSNBC and all these other networks, they're not going to go back and correct all of this. They're not going to lay out the differences and nuances and updates for their audiences. Their audiences heard that this guy might be a groyper, he might be a right-winger, disgruntled, white supremacist, whatever. And that is what the vast majority of them will believe. I remember sitting at a bar with a friend, someone who's a pretty sane person, even though they're a little left of center, just a few months ago, and they looked at me with a straight face, with a couple of their friends nodding in agreement when they said that the Trump assassination was a coordinated CIA op to make sure that he got elected. This is something that real people still believe to this day. So what Jimmy Kimmel is doing, and this is why I have no no guilt about getting him fired, helping to get him fired, is that ultimately what he was doing was setting this narrative. He was making sure to cover for left-wing terrorists, because the leftists cannot admit who they are. They are the party of terrorism. They are the party of political violence. While they cry and scream about the nature of our sacred democracy, what they really mean is that anyone who threatens their homogeneous rule of our country is ultimately a threat to their life, and they will kill you if you disagree or work against them. We all know that's what a number of leftists unfortunately now believe, and we can see it on our timelines every day. And so in order to manufacture this narrative, to stay out in front of all the facts, guys like Jimmy Kimmel ran out there and lied to the American people. Yep. And that is going to be that is going to stay entrenched in many progressive circles for the rest of their lives.
I years ago was on the free speech for all, no matter what wagon. And what did we see? A conservative or right-leaning person, or just anti-establishment, because there were even, social libs who were not lying, but they were getting censored as well, but not as much. They'd get censored, and the left would cheer. These liberal personalities would cheer. And we'd say, but free speech. And they would then make memes of freeze peach and insult you and mock you and laugh about it. And then when a leftist or liberal got censored for some rare reason, they would say, this is unfair. What about my free speech? And then people like me would come out and say, I'm going to defend them. They should be allowed to speak because that's freedom. I changed my mind. Not on free speech, not on the right of everyone to have it, but on defending those who are trying to destroy my way of life. That is to say, if there's a communist, I met a guy in Berkeley, overt communist, wearing a Soviet flag mask, and he said, and I asked him about the violence from the left. He says, it's wrong, man. And then I was like, really? And he goes, yeah, no one should be allowed to do that. They should be arrested. And I was like, I agree with you. I shook his hand. I will defend that man's right to hand out his books and his pamphlets and do whatever, because he stood alongside me saying, we're going to have a battle of ideas. May the best ideas win. And I think I will. But now what I'm seeing is they killed Charlie Kirk for his speech. They are actively trying to, they use email campaigns. They use smear tactics and lies to scare people into suppressing our rights and then beg us to let them to do it. I say no to that. And I think you agree, but there are a lot of people now claiming that this is illiberal or it's leftism itself. I'm curious what you think.
Yeah, it's hard to hold up people like Jimmy Kimmel as free speech champions because, of course, he was making jokes about why it was justified to fire Roseanne Barr when Michelle Obama was making calls to the same network he works for now. He has supported people's cancellation. He has cheered for their cancellation. And I think it's really critical for people to understand this. For a while, me and some guys like me have been trying to explain to conservatives, the wider right, even just non-woke leftists, that we are heading towards a different type of politics. And that's really hard for people to understand because we lived our entire lives under this shared idea of what it meant to be an American, to speak your mind, to have an exchange of ideas. We like that type of politics, but by and far, that is not how politics has been practiced through most of history. Through most of history, politics has been an existential act. It has been about taking your own life into your hands when you deal in the arena of public discourse. Now, I don't want to live in that way. I think the world that Charlie Kirk was trying to perpetuate is the better version of that. But we have to understand that that type of debate only occurs when you share a certain bedrock tradition, faith, principle, belief, understanding of the world. And we have watched as our understanding is rendering itself further and further away from each other to the point now where it's very clear the left has none of those principles at all. And they only pull those principles out when they think they can beat you to death with them. So we're kind of on the other side of the Rubicon here. They shot the free speech guy in the throat. Now, I would like a world where guys like Charlie Kirk can speak freely and convince people with the power and authority of their logical arguments. But they can't do that when people are being shot in the throat. So if we want to get back to a place where that type of politics works, we have to change what we're doing now.
They're lying with their fake stats saying the right is responsible for more extremist acts. It's just fundamentally not true. The stats they use include white supremacist prison gangs getting into fights in prison or white supremacist beating his wife. When you actually look at violent crime in general, if we want to include all of it, Democrats way outrank Republicans. When you look at the cities, these people largely vote Democrat, they're violent. But at least we can say this. in the past couple of years, it's been overwhelmingly far left, especially with the George Floyd riots. So I see these centrist types coming out and saying, I love this one where they say, you better be careful about what you do now because Democrats will take power again. And when they do, they'll come for you. And my response is, it's going to get worse? I was just saying a moment ago, what are they going to do? They're going to exhume our corpses and pull our souls back from the other side? They're already killing people. They killed the free speech guy. So what I'm seeing now is, and to agree with your point you made, is the debate, the free speech, all of that stuff, it works within a community. I disagreed with Charlie on a handful of things. TikTok, for instance. And I'd go on my show and I'd say that. He'd go on his show, express his view, we'd express our views, and Charlie still invited me to be part of his events because despite our political disagreements, we are one community. But what's happened now with these people on the left, they arrested Donald Trump multiple times, accused him of fraud falsely, arrested his lawyers unconstitutionally, imprisoned his supporters, arrested people for memes, and then during the riots, when 30 plus people died, raised money for the rioters who helped make this happen and burn down police stations. Why won't conservatives recognize? Let me put it like this. I was saying this yesterday. Nobody lamented the loss of due process for Soleimani. There were anti-war people who said maybe we shouldn't have done this because it could create war. But no one, not a single person came out and said, why didn't Soleimani get a fair trial in the United States? Well, because he was an enemy combatant in Iraq. He was an Iranian in Iraq and we dropped a bomb on him. Nobody lamented his rights. The question now, the issue I suppose that I think a lot of these people, these libertarian centrists and some conservatives don't recognize is that these leftists have no intention of debating you. They're actively supporting the murder of the guy who wanted to debate. And they're not recognizing that there is a line in which we stop defending people trying to kill us.
Yeah, ultimately, I think there are a number of people who, for many, many decades, were told that wanting power, that exercising power was the most evil thing in the world. Conservatism was all about small government. It was about hands off, don't do anything, never take any action. When we're in power, we just hold back the tide. And when the left's in power, they do whatever they want. They run roughshod over us. Now, not only has that failed as a political strategy, it's obviously just the opposite of what our founding fathers actually said in the Federalist Papers. If you look at Federalist 51, it says ambition checks ambition. If you have one group who is doing something bad, you need another group who will take a action in reaction to what they are doing in order to stop them. Tit for tat. The only thing that ever works in game theory, you can know this academically or you can know this from having been on a playground when you were 7 years old. But we all know how this works. If one side goes completely unanswered with violent actions, with ridiculous actions, calling for violence, pushing this stuff, then they will continue to do that. In fact, they will escalate it. And we're seeing that now because the real worry is not that there would be some terrible reaction on the right to Charlie Kirk's death. That would have been bad. I'm glad there was no retaliatory violence. But the real worry, the scariest worry, is that the state will not take sufficient action to punish those in charge. They will not use the legitimate power of the state to punish those who have perpetuated this violence, are enacting this violence, are planning this violence. And if that is not done, the left will only get crazier. And we can see this right now. You can see major personalities like the Cransteins on Twitter, on the left, talking about how they are Antifa, how they support Antifa's work. They are directly declaring their support for a violent, murderous terrorist network, and they expect to pay no cost. And I'll be real honest here. I want unity on the right. But if guys like James Lindsay and Seth Dillon are going to run out and protect terrorist sympathizers online and say, no, the right are the bad guys, the people trying to bring justice are the bad guys, the people warning about the murders are the bad guys, and actually we support and the people who are cheering on Antifa, sorry, I don't have time for that. I don't want to fight with the right now. I don't want to feud with that. I don't want to use Charlie Kirk's death to settle any scores. I want the left to stop murdering people. And there is a set of actions that have to be taken to make that happen. And if you are telling me that we're not allowed to do that, then sorry, I have no time for you. That's
why I refer to James Lindsay and Seth Dillon as the woke right, because they are, James purporting to be more, I don't think he calls himself a conservative, but independent, and Seth Dillon purported conservative, but they serve the interests of the leftist orthodoxy. They are the right side of the woke coin. Now, of course, they use the term to describe this amorphous nebulous, vague group of people on the right of varying ideologies, which makes literally no sense. My view is this. I completely agree with you. They are coming out now, and I'll put it this way. I asked a legitimate philosophical, moral question of Seth Dillon. And for those that aren't familiar, he's the guy from the Babylon Bee. What would the left have to do or collectively support for you to not defend them? Serious question. And the response I got was, you misspelled your, and when did you stop beating your wife? Because they couldn't answer the question. So they pretended that I was making a rhetorical statement in defense of cancellations, or it was a legitimate question. The reality is they can't actually answer it. Well, I asked this question legitimately because we ask it of all rights. Individuals have freedom of movement. At what point do we tell a person not anymore? We know the line. It is, if you walk into a grocery store and grab an apple and walk out, guess what? We have decided as a society, we will take your right of freedom of movement from you. If you smash a window and enter someone's building, you did not have the freedom to do that. We will lock you in a box. Now you can't go anywhere until we say otherwise. So when it comes to these simple things, we even determine, and this is what I find fascinating in the argument, the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Actually, our society largely determines that the line at which an individual without force of government can decide to deprive you of life, it's actually much less than the threat of death. Simply fear of death or injury, great bodily harm, is enough in our society for an individual to determine they can take your life from you legally and lawfully. Now, I don't want anyone to die. Of course not. I want people to be able to speak freely, but that's where the line is socially. When it comes to these people who are lying intentionally to inflame tensions, escalate violence, and encourage others, or to satisfy their bloodlust, I'm not going to defend them. I'm certainly not saying that I think this stupid teacher who, lied about Charlie Kirk, I'm not saying celebrated death, I'm saying just lied about his worldview, should have been fired. Some people have gotten her fired. They ask me to go and defend her and try and get her job back. No way. She may not be, in my view, threatening my life. But the point is this. I'm not going to defend her. When I ask this of these woke right guys, James Lindsay and Seth Dillon, they don't have an answer as to what line needs to be crossed. So I'll make it simple. When the collective actions of the left are to support the murder of a good man who wanted debate and free speech, at bare minimum, I say, I am not going to defend them. They argue it's defending free speech, not the person. That's semantic nonsense. They're asking me to go for a bat to espouse a view that would get this person their job back. I'm not going to do it. I assume you agree. I'm kind of ranting on this one, though.
No, I'm with you 100%. And this is why ultimately I felt like Jimmy Kimmel needed to be removed from television in a way that some teacher who, said they don't like Charlie Kirk does not. I don't think that person should really be teaching my kids either. But definitely Jimmy Kimmel going out there and lying to millions of people to cover for terrorists is absolutely something that has to stop. And, in his book, Thoughts on Machiavelli, the philosopher Leo Strauss said that Machiavelli, who actually supported Republican government, most people think he was a monarchist, but actually he was pro-Republican government. And he said that Republican governments require, of course, virtuous people who share a culture, share an identity, share an understanding. And he said in the life of every republic, you'll come to a moment where the rules of that republic have degraded so much, the quality of people in the republic have degraded so much that you have to do something outside of the rules to bring things back into alignment, to return yourself to a place where you can live by those rules again. Now, I don't even know if we're there entirely, but it's very clear that half of the country has fallen out of this understanding of the rules. Their character has degraded. They are no longer capable of the type of self-government and self-control that is required for a republic to flourish. And so in order to bring those people back into line, to set a corrective state where we can return to a place where guys like Charlie Kirk can sit peacefully without fear on a college campus and speak the truth, we're going to need to take action to correct that 50% of the population. This is not some crazy idea. This is not some this is a very reasonable understanding that has been brought about throughout philosophical understanding, through political theory, throughout the entirety of the discipline. So this is not a crazy thing to say. This is just the basics that are required, that are understood by everyone from Machiavelli to our founders to Leo Strauss. This is a basic thing that is understood by everyone who has actually looked at how politics works. You cannot allow half the population to not believe in the tenets of Republican government, but expect them to then reap the benefits of Republican government. It's one or the other.
There's a funny meme where it's like a comic, and there's a man and a woman living in a field, and the man constructs a fence around the property and says, "I've constructed this fence, wife, to keep you safe from wolves." And then the next panel is a wolf comes up and says, "That man just created this fence to keep you imprisoned. Tear down this fence and be free." So she does, and then the wolf eats her. And the idea, it's largely shared by like red pill guys to make this point about feminism and stuff. But I think the idea is actually extending beyond that. These woke right guys who are defending what the left does because principles are exactly the person who doesn't understand that they are in a fenced, protected society. And it is unfortunate that this great nation has created such a great system, better than every other system, that it's created people who don't realize what life is like outside of it. And so when the left says, collectively, our intention is to destroy your way of life, they think, but we have always just debated, and that has always worked for us. Despite the fact that 250 years ago, the founding fathers actually fought a bloody war to be able to actually have this way of life. And there were loyalists who sided with the crown to stop that from happening. And even, some people don't know, a declaration of dependence. They didn't literally call it that, but it is colloquially called that. So the way I look at it is like this. There are people that say an authoritarian right-wing government is a nightmare dystopia. And the question I ask is, why do you believe that, and what does it look like? Well, it looks like V for Vendetta, right? Where the chancellor was making up lies to control the public and experimenting on people. And then I say, wow, you're right. That's really bad. We don't want that. And then simultaneously, we say the communists were substantially worse in real life. 125 million deaths, all that stuff. We don't want that either. We don't want authoritarianism. So then, recognizing those fears, Trump says, I will deploy the National Guard to stop crime. And we are told not to allow that, because that would be like the right-wing government of V for Vendetta. But I was talking to my friends about it, and they said, "What do you like? What's it going to look like if Trump does this?" And I said, "You won't notice a thing. You'll notice later. You'll be driving down the street in D.C. There will be no homeless people. There'll be less crime. It'll be cleaner. And then periodically, you might have a guy walk up to you and say, "Excuse me, sir, where are you headed?" And you'll be like, "I'm just going to Starbucks." And it'll be like, yeah, what are you doing there? And you'll be like, "I'm just going to grab a coffee and go to work." And it'll say, "All right, have a good day, sir." And that's it. They seem to think that every circumstance in which there is law enforcement will be a dictatorship. But that's just this, it's a fear that I understand. But just because there are police and law enforcement doesn't mean they're going to be beating you and locking you in cages.
It is, in fact, the prerequisite for an ordered society. But I think a lot of people need to understand where we're at historically. So in the lead up to the Spanish Civil War, there was a lot of terrorism from the left. They murdered public officials, private individuals. They bombed people on a routine basis. Anarchists were murdering government officials who were right-wing in the street. And the Republican government at the time would not take action because they were sympathetic to the left. So they kept making excuses as to why they couldn't do anything. Oh, well, we have to abide by blah, 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 blah. But what people saw over and over again were people being murdered in the street consistently by the left. And eventually the people said, you know what? Give me Franco. Because if the government cannot stop this, if they will not stop it, if they refuse to use their righteous position as the civil magistrate under the authority of God to stop those that are murdering people who are just trying to participate in the government, then I need someone who will. And so for those who truly are worried about right-wing authoritarianism, if you're really worried about the big scary man, the mid-century German coming for you, then let me tell you something. The best thing you can do now is actually use the legal force that you have to put a severe penalty on those who are planning violence, who are promoting violence, who are deploying it. Because if you do not, the next guy will be Franco. It will be someone who is pushing for this.
My understanding is the executive summary of the Spanish Civil War is the right actually won power, did nothing to stop the left running rampant, killing people, and allowed the leftists to regain power in government. And it was then Franco, witnessing everything happening, started speaking with other people, finding loyalists, and said, we have to stop this now or else. And then I believe he was in Morocco and then came up to Spain. The people who agreed with him decided to fight alongside him, and then they decided to take over. The fascinating thing is, they say it was a right-wing authoritarian takeover after Spain and all that stuff. Francoism ended when Franco died. And the government was just like, okay, we'll be a democratic system again. Whereas with, Mao, the country is still under this authoritarian control. North Korea, the Soviet Union, it broke apart. But look how those countries are doing. And Putin's been in power for decades and just bounces back and forth with this authoritarian system. It's fascinating how these right-wing systems eventually just fizzle out and break, even like South America.
Yeah, again, I think it's one of those moments where you have a corrective to a left wing that is just completely out of control. It is, again, that restorative moment. Now, I hope we don't get to that point. I hope that Donald Trump uses the authority of the government to crack down sufficiently, not just on the Antifa members, though absolutely they should all be in jail. I need thousands of arrests. I want agents kicking down doors, swinging through windows, ripping leftists who are planning violence out of their beds in the middle of the night and putting them in leg irons. I want it public. I want it to be clear. There is a cost now. You can't just blow up cities, burn cities down, shoot at presidents, murder firefighters, murder conservative activists. That is over. Because if we do not send that message, the people will find someone who will. And so I am hoping very much that under the color of law, with nothing but legitimate government action, Donald Trump does what needs to be done here. Because that is actually what stops leftist violence, not wringing your hands about abstract principles that don't even apply in this scenario. We have principles. We have plenty of principles. And those principles are defending the people of the United States and their rights to speak. Charlie Kirk's right to free speech was ended by a bullet. If we do not stop leftists from ending the rights of people with a bullet, things are going to only get worse.
Abraham Lincoln suspended habeas corpus, sent troops into states that had defied the Union. And he had the Maryland, I think a third of the Maryland legislature was arrested for being sympathetic to the South because Maryland was a slave state. And he's the most popular president in history. And they cheer for him and celebrate him. So when you ask these Democrats about Abraham Lincoln, they'll tell you, of course, he was the best. Now, maybe their reasons may be different. He ended slavery, they'll say. Well, if they say that his actions were justified, what he did was good, okay, then there comes a time when a leader says, the rules be damned, I'm doing what must be done to preserve the Union. If they say that's fascism, you can realize they're talking about both sides of their mouths because they praise Abraham Lincoln in one sentence and then deny him in the other. I think there's a reality. That's what I was saying about when Soleimani died. We as a government are concerned about infringements against those in our community because the government is supposed to be of, for, and by us. The problem is the left has made clear they are not in the same community as us. And so what then? If people are actively killing you, opening your borders to 20 million non-citizens, allowing non-citizens to vote, they are telling you outright they are not of the same body politic. If you then let them do it, you are just laying down and surrendering. I think that's the reality for a lot of these fake conservative woke right types, is that their attitude is, let the left win by brute force because then I can be left alone.
Sam Francis called this the beautiful losers, right? As long as I can say that I am morally clean, I am morally just, then it doesn't matter if I lose. It doesn't matter if I fail, except it turns out it does matter quite a bit. Unfortunately, the magical system a lot of people pretend the founders believed in, they didn't actually believe in. They tell you what limits the power of the government and overreach by people, and that is consequences. But a lot of people have said, oh no, if we just tell them, if we just lecture them with, principles, they'll understand, they'll come to recognize that ultimately we are in the right. But of course you're correct. The left has championed guys like FDR who, interred the Japanese and the Germans, who ended up, taking over and seizing large amounts of government authority, who threatened to pack the court if they didn't do what he wanted to do. And he's a titan of the left. These people are not just super excited about demonstrations of restrained government. When's the last time you saw a leftist praising Calvin Coolidge?
My one last thing real quick. I got about a minute left. My favorite thing recently is we've had this debate about whether the United States was a Christian nation. And I think you probably know this. Most people don't. The liberals argue they didn't put it in the Constitution because it wasn't a Christian nation. When in reality, the reason why the federal Constitution did not mandate Christianity was because the states had different Maryland was Catholic, most states were Protestant, and the state constitutions of every colony except Virginia required a professed belief in a Christian God. So the federal Constitution said, look, we get it. There's different denominations here. Maryland is largely Catholic, so we don't want to tell you what to believe. The states have done it already. And now they argue that this was a secular nation from the get-go, ignoring what the founding fathers actually said. Only Jefferson in Virginia was like, no, we're not going to do that here. But we are at a time. So any last thoughts or anything you want to shout out? Where can people find you?
Of course, I'm over at Blaze TV, of course, with the show, Auron MacIntyre Show. It's also on all the podcast platforms, YouTube, Rumble, Odyssey. You can pick up my book, The Total State, on Amazon. Thank you again for having me, Tim.
Thanks for joining, man, and we'll see you next time.
Yep.
All right. That was, of course, Auron MacIntyre. I think he's had made a lot of great points as to this culture war that we are facing. And, I'll make that point one more time. I believe, obviously, when you read about the founding fathers, the United States was founded as a Christian nation. Look this up if you haven't already. We went through all of this. The original 13 colonies all required a professed belief in God. In fact, some of them actually said a Protestant God, and that you could not be Catholic. Like, they actually barred Catholics. That's how strict they were on their religion. The federal Constitution didn't make mention of this, and freedom of religion was protected because they knew there were different denominations of Christian, but for the most part, the states themselves mandated this. The founding fathers in all of these states were like, yeah, of course. The country was 99% Christian. I am not saying that you have to believe whatever. I'm not saying you should be forced to believe whatever. I'm saying these are the moral traditions of this nation, and it's what we have. The left is opposed to this. I think it's fair to say there's a direct correlation between the decrease in Christianity and Christian moral tradition and the rise of secular leftists who believe the fascistic ethos. There is no truth but power. So, my friends, I'm going to wrap it up there. Smash the like button. Share the show with everyone you know. We've got our good friend, I believe Russell Brand, is gearing up to go live right now. So we will send you on your way to go hang out with Russell. And we will be back at 8 p.m. tonight for Timcast IRL. Join us there. Go to timcast.com, click join us, get in that Discord server. Like-minded individuals, now more than ever, we need to bring people together and build and expand community. So, with that being said, thanks for hanging out, and we will see you all tonight at 8 p.m.